this weekly live stream that we do. It's co-hosted by me, and we've got Brian White from Futuraza. We've got Nick Gibbs from Investing in the Grain. And today we've got a special guest with us, Richard Hoffman. He's a lawyer, legal counsel. He's going to help us guide us through. We're talking about the Doge. This is Elon Musk and Vivek, who has been tapped by Trump to lead a Doge, Department of Government Efficiency. There are two things that are really important statements that came out of this announcement yesterday. The first one is that this will be outside of the government. So that's the most critical thing, is that these guys are not part of the government per se, like they're not in cabinet positions, and that there's a very specific date. It'll conclude no later than July 4th, 2026. So if you read this, it says here, I'm pleased to announce that the great Elon Musk, working in conjunction with the American patriot Vivek Ramaswamy, they're going to lead the Department of Government Efficiency, called Doge. These two wonderful Americans will pave the way for my administration to dismantle government bureaucracy, slash regulations, cut wasteful expenditures, and they're going to help save America movement. So this is, he called it the Manhattan Project of our time. And this is something that everybody wants to have happen. They're going to work outside of the government, and they were going to will partner with the White House and the Office of Management and Budget to be able to deliver this. And again, the most important thing is that there is $6.5 trillion of government spending. They're going to try to cut out the massive waste and fraud that's part of that, and that they're going to conclude no later than July 4th of 2026. This is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So having it a very short period of time, and that's really the most critical thing, is that there's a defined time. And it did not move the stock. Nobody's afraid that Elon's going to be busy and working on this. Anybody here want to take this on first?
Well, I don't know if it's moved the stock. I mean, it doesn't appear to be the case. I mean, the stock has moved down a little bit today, but that could be any number of things. It could be profit taking, was how I read it. So I think, I don't think Wall Street has a concern with this. We don't know what the details really are yet. We don't know how involved it is. If it's going to be, if Elon's not stepping back from any of his companies, then I think we've got, an opportunity to see it as something that takes, 40 to 60 hours for a couple weeks, then 20 hours a week, then 10, and then the report is done. I don't know. He'd bring on people more expert at diving into the individual departments and numbers and figure out what to recommend.
Anybody else? Quick comments? We'll dive deeper into each of these spaces. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say I look at it differently. I think about whether this can withstand constitutional scrutiny. I think it's, and I agree, by the way, I think it's a great idea. And I'm not a constitutional scholar, so let me preface that. I'm as much a constitutional scholar as everybody here, so no more so. But the concern is, in the Constitution, there's a separation of powers. So we have a judicial branch, a legislative branch, and an executive branch. The executive branch is supposed to appoint the leadership of agencies, cabinet members, etc. The legislative branch is supposed to confirm cabinet members, the heads of agencies, etc. Just because I call something outside the government doesn't make it outside the government. What it makes it is, about a month ago, whenever this first came up, there was a discussion, and Elon was asked to take on this task. And Elon met with his lawyers, and they said, if we're going to do this, what's the best structure we could do? How could we set this up to withstand scrutiny? What's the best way? And they said, let's set it up so it appears to be we're advisors outside of the government, but we don't have ultimate power. And that's how we're acting. And we're going to try to circumvent that. The problem with that is, and I think Vivek actually put something out there yesterday or today, talking about certain Supreme Court cases that he thought supported what they were doing. And there was a couple of cases in the last term. One was called Looper, which said basically there was a concept in constitutional law where federal agencies, if the agency said, this is what I believe it should happen, if someone sued the agency and it went to court, the court would accept what the agency's determination was. In the last Supreme Court term, there was a case called Looper, which decided that wasn't the way it should be. So it took away power from the regulatory agencies and made it so, as opposed to relying upon the regulator's decision, it was up to the courts to decide it. So in effect, what the Supreme Court did, and it's a court that would be favorable to the Republican Party, it's at least perceived to be, is they said that there is less power in regulators. But where did that power go? It didn't go to the people, it went to the courts. That's what the Supreme Court said. And that's this term. This is right now. So this particular attempt is attempting to circumvent that. And if I were to advise them, and the concern is, by the way, if they went the straight way, this is what they would do. Congress has the right to set up the regulatory agencies, not the president. So Congress would set up the regulatory agency. The president would set up the leadership of that agency. They would define the abilities of that agency. They could limit the time of that agency. They could literally say, starts January 6, 2025, runs to July 4th, 2026. They would define the specific duties and what they were trying to accomplish. They might face resistance from the Democrats because there's a filibuster requirement, but eventually they would prevail. Then there would be an agency in effect. That agency then could operate. Now, the way it's set up, if it's going to go as suggested, whether they're going to portray it as something outside the agency, as soon as it may not be the first person, but when they get rid of people, somebody will be approached by a lawyer. They will bring a lawsuit. They will challenge the firing based upon separation of powers in the Constitution. That this was not for the president to set up. This was for Congress to set up. And any action taken in reliance upon that is not constitutional. Now, that's not going to make a difference. It's not going to stop anybody from doing what they want to. So let's say January 6th, Elon, Trump, whoever, they want to go forward. They will go forward. I have no doubt that they will move forward and do whatever they need to do. But the reality is somebody's going to get fired. They will file a lawsuit. They will challenge it at the trial court, probably lose. That might take 2 years. Take it up on appeal, probably lose. Takes another year. We're in the year 4 of the presidency when the case goes up to the Supreme Court. And when it goes up to the Supreme Court, the issue of whether there is a violation of the separation of powers. By the time it's decided by the Supreme Court, Trump will be out of office. It'll be 4 years. So it's to Trump, I think it's a no risk because it will, I think the goal intent is a good idea. And if it works, it will save taxpayers trillions of dollars. And if it's overturned by the Supreme Court after he leaves office, he'll blame the Supreme Court. That's what will happen. But for everybody else, to the extent that there's a bunch of employees that are going to be fired, because I think upwards maybe of 1.5 million federal employees could be fired. At some point in time, there's an area of law called wrongful termination. If someone's wrongfully terminated from their job, one of the remedies they get is they get their job back. So can you imagine 1.5 million employees are fired, and 5 years from now, we have to rehire them or have to pay them 5 years of salary for not having it done in the correct way. So I think it's in this case, I believe it's just impatience. They could do it, and they could do it in a much more constitutionally friendly way, in a much better way in terms of surviving challenge, but expediency is one out.
Mm-hmm.
Can I offer a different opinion on that?
Mm-hmm.
I push back on the premise that it's not constitutional. What they do moving at the speed they're going to, one is the whole point of this because of the bureaucracy that we have in the system. But if they go about this and someone threatens a lawsuit and it goes through its process, goes through Supreme Court, that is still constitutional. That is still letting the process work, right? You thought they were doing something wrong. They thought they weren't. They go that back and forth. What they're saying is, let's just take action now. We think that we have a case here. We'll reap the benefits, and that's it. I also don't think it would be considered wrongfully terminated if positions are just eliminated or if they're laid off, right? If they get severance packages and they accept the severance packages, especially if it's like a 2-year severance package, to me, there's like zero chance, zero risk on this. Even if it got to Supreme Court, it's a friendly Supreme Court. I see zero risk. I think if anything, it would be silly not to do this and not to move faster than trying to get permission. It's the problem with the way we are. We're bloated. We move too slow.
I'm going to take a little detour and we'll come right back in and talk about this and share more information on exactly what's going to happen. But for those people who think that Elon is going to be distracted, first of all, we'll take a look at the response right now from the institutional analysts who are actually not reacting to this at all because of those two main points. That this is a very defined time frame until July 4th, 2026, and they're advising outside of the government. But in the meantime, this breaking news just, it's not exactly breaking news because we don't know how real this is. But there's news now that Tesla might already be talking with two large OEMs in China. It's SAIC and Geely to partner for FSD. You've got this information according to Chinese investment institutional firm Tianfeng Securities. In the latest news that they published, they're saying that Tesla may cooperate with Chinese OEMs on FSD and robotaxi in China market. Tesla has held 2 rounds of negotiations with SAIC and has held talks with Geely. I think it's important for us to bring this up. I know it's right in the middle of a discussion of Doge, but this is a point about how, number one, it's massive for Tesla. This is a big deal if this is true. Number two, this shows you that Tesla is going to continue moving forward, regardless of if Elon is distracted or not. The last several weeks, he's been involved so heavily in politics, and he's been spending his time at Mar-a-Lago. He's just spotted today on the plane with Trump. He's announcing the Doge, and yet these things are still moving forward. And three, it's a discussion about China, because there are people who are bears who are saying, oh, watch out, right? The 2 points that the bears have made so far is Elon's going to be distracted, and two, what's going to happen in China? He can't be dealing with them if there's a conflict of interest, if he's part of the government. So what do you guys think about this announcement? And do you guys think that there is a conflict of interest if Elon is outside of the government working for Doge, and yet he has his businesses that are doing tremendous amount of work in China?
I think it could be a conflict of interest. I'm less worried about that. It remains to be seen just how involved this position is going to be. I read it as Elon and Vivek will be writing up a list of suggestions, which would then be handed to Congress to get through on the next budget. If they've got all branches of government, they can just pass it via reconciliation. But like Richard was saying, it could be that it's a protracted battle, but one that they would win. If that's the case, that is truly advisory. But if they're inside, if they're actually in the government doing something, it doesn't matter if you pretend they're not there. If they're not drawing a paycheck, that doesn't automatically kick them out. I think that would make it just one more step of detachment. But the China partnership, I don't see that as an issue any bigger than it would already be for Elon, with SpaceX being the largest aerospace launch provider, and Tesla being the largest recipient of benefits related to green auto incentives.
I was going to say the only thing he has to worry about, and again, I'm the cautious one, of course, is there's something called the Hatch Act, and it'll be especially more relevant once he's involved in the government. But a private citizen can't do foreign policy. So the issue in China would be, at some point in time, does it cross over to foreign policy? I don't know, because he's going to be, by the way, he'd be great for that position, because he's got a great relationship with the Chinese government. And if he does it purely for the government, it would be great. But when it crosses over, there is a provision that says you, again, it's constitutional provision called the Hatch Act, and it says you can't do it. I wanted to address one thing that Nick said, just kind of to kind of contrast something. So I agree with you. They certainly can. They can. One, I think they're going to do it anyway, and I think so my view is they're going to go full steam ahead anyway. My view was, though, looking at after the fact and the likelihood that it would be challenged and the likelihood you could have ramifications after the fact. And because it goes through the court system doesn't mean it's constitutional, just means it goes through the court system. Because if the conclusion of the court is it's unconstitutional, that means it's unconstitutional. That just means the court system decided that. And my differing about the current court is, of course, it's a friendly court, except in this area, it's an originalist. The court itself is originalist. In other words, they look at the original transcript of the Constitution, and they don't interpret too much. That's kind of their approach. There's some people who look to today and they try to interpret what they meant back in 1786. So what's significant about that? What's significant about that is the original, if you look at the basic elements of the Constitution, separation of powers is one of the most basic elements of the Constitution, the three branches of government. So I happen to believe that if pushed, this might be one of those cases where the Supreme Court is in agreement, 9-0, that they agree that they may not disagree with the outcome. Again, I think the conclusion, if we can cut $2 trillion, I think Elon said $2 trillion, might be able to cut $2 trillion out of the budget. Who wouldn't like that? I mean, unless you're, I guess, one of those workers who's getting terminated. But otherwise, just because it's a good outcome and the court is conservative, I think this area happens to be an area that happens to be a very sensitive area for them. And that's why I see a risk. Now, I still think they would go forward, but that's why I see the risk.
Yeah.
Well, Republicans are officially House majority. That was just announced. That just came out. Yeah, I hear you on that, Richard. My thing, though, is I really, I get it, because my best friend's a lawyer, so I get the element of trying to look backwards and the what ifs and what if this happens, then what? But I'm in tech, and for me, once we have 70% confidence, something we just go. We don't care, unless it's something that will just be very detrimental to a client and to us. Like we call it a one-way door. Unless it's a one-way door, we don't care. 70% information, we go, and that's what I see here. This is a two-way door, meaning the worst case scenario, not that bad. We go. And that's the way I think we need to work more as a country. And I think that's the whole point of this. It's almost laughable to think that we're not going to use our best and brightest for our government where we actually need it. And we're so quick to say oh, this is unconstitutional or whatever. You know what's also unconstitutional? All these lobbyists. You know what else is unconstitutional? A two-party system. There's lots of things that are unconstitutional, but we don't want to look at the government themselves, right? You know what else was unconstitutional until last 80 years? Federal income tax, right? There's lots of things that were unconstitutional and that we don't really look at. As far as the overseas, Herbert, I don't think this will have an impact. We can say that Elon can't be a representative or do foreign policy. We're all lying to ourselves, and we don't think he's doing foreign policy and shining the great light of our country to the rest of the world. Look at Ukraine. If it wasn't for Elon, guess what? It's over. All right. You could just Starlink just across the world in general. Every time he goes to Europe, every time he's meeting with world leaders, come on, he's a representation of the United States. We know what's happening there. And to be honest, he's probably what kept a lot of relationships afloat while other things were happening with our current leadership. So, I think he's the best representation of what America can be, whether for immigrants and for citizens. And I think that's his role. And that's what the role of all of our leaders should be, is to be like that. And look, he's arguably the most powerful man in the world right now, with the ear of Trump his what do they say? His first buddy is what they're calling it now, and he's also the wealthiest man in the world, and he controls the arguably the most important weapon technology in the world. Like he's the guy.
Let's see how
That's
old
nicely said.
let's see how old you guys are. I think Trump is calling Elon Gilligan.
Oh
Yeah.
no. Oh, little buddy. So my question would be,
That's funny.
since this is advisory and it would have to be approved by Congress and then the Senate and then signed, do we actually think all of the Republicans would be on board with all of the cuts suggested when it is going to impact all of their districts?
I think, we're out 1.5 years. They're 1.5 years, and then there's election 6 months after. So
Yeah, is that coincidence? I don't think so.
yeah, it's not. I agree. I think, that's the call. Is it going to be election depending on your district? If you're in a district and you have to cut 500,000 employees in your district, that might be a tough election for you.
It'd be a bloodbath.
Yeah. Let's I want to report some more information here, tell you more about what Doge is. So first of all, the market did not react to this announcement because of those two specific statements, two specific details. Here's Dan Ives, Wedbush Securities, saying that since this is not an official cabinet or US government position, and it's essentially newly created, there will be no changes to Musk's CEO roles with Tesla and SpaceX, importantly, from the street's perspective. So they like that. And here is...
Can I comment on something? Everybody who's commenting, this is all speculation. Nobody knows. We've never been in this place before. Anybody who purports to know is not telling you the truth. I mean, that's Dan Ives does not know. Dan Ives is not a constitutional scholar.
What we're reporting is all the institutional analysts, and they were very concerned that Elon was going to be very, part of the government now, quitting Tesla.
And I'm telling you, that is not known. This is not settled. This is not settled law. Nobody is saying, there was a case and we decided. This is all speculation. And anybody suggesting it's beyond speculation is not telling you the truth. They may believe it, but to purport it to be true is not accurate.
I think you guys are talking past each other.
Yeah, no, the press release from Trump, the government official, says that this is Doge, is going to be a separate organization, and just the statements that it's only going to last at this point, this time, and it's going to be outside the government, that's enough. They can change it. They can have a completely different rule later, but that's an official announcement. So I don't know what you're saying.
I'm telling you, I'll repeat it again. It's meaningless. It's meaningless.
Okay, that's your interpretation.
I can call a brownie ice cream. It doesn't change the brownie.
Well, I think the part that's not meaningless is that this indicates that Elon is not stepping down. And I think that's the main part here.
Yeah.
He is not stepping down from CEO of anything. Hence why Trump said that this would be separate, that they would not be part of anything, because clearly Elon has said he will not step down.
No.
That has nothing, legal has nothing to do with that. If
Richard, he can change his mind. He can announce a retirement next time, but at this point, they did not do that.
They've been working on this for a month. I'm sorry.
I'm going to agree with Richard on this. I've seen it in real estate transactions all the time where someone will pretend that a transaction is arm's length when it isn't, and you will get that doesn't make just putting in a contract. Oh, also this is an arm's length transaction doesn't make it one. It has to actually be one. If it is strictly advisory, if it is just, I'm going to send you a document with some ideas, you can use them or not, I think it's fine. But if it goes, we don't know how deep it'll be. Elon is, there's tweets where he's saying that, this or that, cut it. It's gone. I'm going to fire those people. If he has the power to fire people, he's in the government.
I feel like we're missing the point completely. The point is Elon's not stepping down as CEO.
Yeah.
If he was going to step down, he would have done that and taken an actual government position.
Right. But if he goes over the line, that line, it doesn't matter if he says he's separate or not. It would then become a conflict of interest. So it's a fine line.
We are talking about a very specific thing right now, which is whether or not Elon was going to quit these organizations in order to become a cabinet member. And as of yesterday, that is not what they announced. That's all we're saying here at this point. Okay, let's share a little bit more what Doge is going to be. Department of Government officials. Here's Elon. explaining the importance of this, why he's creating this organization. There are around 428 federal agencies. There's so many that people have never even heard of. I think we should be able to get away with 99 agencies. This is an older video, but explains what it is.
I kind of like Doge. It's more fun. Where we just take a look at all the federal agencies and say, do we really need whatever it is, 428 federal agencies? Like, if there's so many that people have never even heard of, and that have overlapping areas of responsibility, we should, I don't know, we should get, I mean, there are more federal agencies than there are years since the establishment of the United States, which means that we've created more than one federal agency per year on average. That seems a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. So we should have, that seems crazy. I think we should be able to get away with 99 agencies. I don't know. That seems a lot like a lot of agencies.
It's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
2 per state. That's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. We should have fewer agencies, and they certainly shouldn't have overlapping responsibilities. And then we need some kind of, we just need a review of regulations to say which ones are sensible and which ones are not. Because if you've got regulators every year, they're going to add more regulations, just automatic. Like they just output regulations, and there's more laws and regulations every year until basically everything's legal, so we can't get anything done. So we need some kind of garbage collection for regulations that don't make sense. I think I'm saying very obvious things.
You are saying obvious things.
Yeah. So
which will be very unpopular things.
Yeah. I'll probably need, if this happens, quite a significant security team. So that, because someone might literally go postal on me from the post office.
Excuse me for laughing at a bad joke like that. He did say this too. I think it's important for people to understand this. He said this: all actions of the Department of Government Efficiency will be posted online for maximum transparency. Anytime the public thinks we are cutting something important or not cutting something wasteful, just let us know. We will also have a leaderboard for most insanely dumb spending of your tax dollars. This will be both extremely tragic and extremely entertaining. He just posted that yesterday. So everything's going to be transparent, and he's going to cut agencies. Some people are going, hey, you've created an agency to cut agencies, but...
The whole thing is just, I mean, how many subscribers do you want me to lose is, I guess, my question. Because this is... It shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what a government is and how a government works. And to think that a government is a business or a government should be a business is dangerous. And I think it's certainly everyone agrees that waste, fraud, and abuse should be addressed. Every president since forever has said that. But we also have more members of Congress than we have years since we've been a nation. But it's that doesn't mean we have too many members of Congress, although some people would disagree. Some people say we should have more, that they should be back to the representation levels that we had when Congress was originally created. Every regulation is written in blood. So I guess the question is, how much blood do we like? And I guess the answer is more.
Well, the problem, Brian, is that we're spending $6.5 trillion right now. It's $1 trillion of interest per year. If you don't do this or you go at status quo, the country's dead. It's going to run out. The interest rate has risen past kind of like a runaway zone at this point. So I'll explain more about the actual crisis, but we'll get there. Go ahead.
Question. If we shouldn't run it like a business, and we clearly shouldn't run it the way we are right now, what do we run it as?
Right. Recognizing a problem and addressing a problem are two different things, I suppose. But a imperfect system doesn't mean burn it down. And I know there's a lot of people who want it to just burn down.
Nobody said that. Now you're being hyperbolic. Elon never said that. No one said that.
No, he didn't say it, but these actions are burn it down. And I mean,
I think that's
it doesn't matter because none of it's going to pass. Well, I mean,
I'll put a bet on that if you want to. Copy that.
Yeah.
Well, my
Beer
question
debt.
would be,
IPA.
how do we measure success of Doge?
Well, you said none of it's going to happen, so my success is it happens. Something happens.
What happens? I'd love to be able to, because the other day I was having a conversation with someone and I said, we don't need to fight. We don't need to argue. Don't attack people. Just say, look, Republicans control all the houses now. Just tell your angry cousin or whomever, tell them what's going to happen over the next 4 years. And before the next presidential election comes, come back to them and say, here's what you and I talked about. Here's what we said was going to happen. And it has happened. So my question is, what's going to happen? How do we measure the success of this?
Well, I hope people are realizing this should not be a partisan discussion anymore. Yeah. This is the government in the United States. We're now talking about the proper implementation of a program that do you believe that it's required? Number one, step one. And I'll go through the numbers here. It's looking like it's required. Then step two is, how would we do that so that, like you're saying, how do we know it's successful versus is it improper, right? Are you favoring one organization over another? Are you cutting people and you shouldn't be? How do you know that you cut too much? But the one thing I'll say is that of any person in this entire earth, Elon's the one I would trust most. He's proven it time and time again. And it's going to be painful. There will be overcutting and there will be pain. That it makes mistakes. That will happen. But it needs to happen.
What is the measurement of success for Doge?
Well, let's start with one, which is make sure the country does not go bankrupt. There's a $35 trillion crisis, and it's America's last chance. I mean, that might be hyperbolic. So Trump has given Elon and Vivek until July 4th, and they're going to transform how our government spends a $6.5 trillion annual budget. And you've heard Elon say, we're going to try to cut $2 trillion of that $6.5 trillion. I don't know where that number comes from. I don't know. It makes sense. But here's the numbers. Debt doubled to $35 trillion since 2015. Interest rates jumped to 3.32%. Interest payments now exceed $1 trillion annually. Debt to GDP ratio is at 124%. And the Doge team will have just 18 months to audit $1.72 trillion in health and human services, $1.52 trillion in social security, $1.32 in treasury payments, identify waste across all federal agencies, the real-time transparency combined with Vivek's regulatory expertise. They're going to try to deliver a smaller government. Like you say, how do you know that's successful? Why is smaller even better? With interest payments now exceeding our entire military budget, $826 billion, the deadline reflects the urgency of our fiscal crisis, July 4th, 2026. Here are some numbers to show you how the debt to GDP ratio has just completely gotten out of hand at this point. And then you can see the debt here has completely just continued to fall. You can't let this keep going down while the interest payment rates have gone up. And then here's an interesting thing that happened here. This is political now. It says here that Biden-Harris spent $42 billion on rural internet service. 3 years later, not one person's connected. Now, I've heard the arguments that explain that this is a bit of a wrong statement to say, that this number wasn't just spent for here. There's like pathways it was going to go through. He said, Doge should look into this. It's interesting what Elon replied. He said, that program has achieved nothing, deleted. The reason I bring that up is it makes it sound like Elon has power. He goes, I don't like that program. Done. He's acting fast. But it feels like he has the power to do this. He was given the authority to just do this. So,
that's
I would
why
say you're reading too much into that.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
In my view again, I'm different than Brian. I'm pro it. I'm in favor of the goal. I'm not in favor of the process. So I would do it. I would follow what I believe the Constitution requires you to follow, to set up an agency for a limited time to do the work and then eradicate the agency and be done. And I think that would have a much better chance of succeeding.
I absolutely agree with the goal. It's the execution that sounds like it doesn't understand how government works. But I would still want to know, I mean, is the measure of success cutting $2 trillion from the budget?
That's one. bring
Okay.
it into a number that's under control, that doesn't spiral away.
Because the debt to GDP thing, I mean, Japan's debt to GDP is double what ours is, and they haven't gone bankrupt yet. Maybe they will. So that is, while I agree it's completely out of control, we've had some spending that's been absolutely insane and indefensible over the last 25 years. And we've had some tax cuts that didn't always make sense. We've had some tax cuts that did. But the problem is huge, and I don't know how much we can cut our way out of it, but I guess we'll find out.
Maybe it'll
Yeah,
be
but-
the new Doge to Dogecoin ratio. That'll be the measure of success. There are some people believe that if you expand the size of the economy, that is a solution to the debt.
Absolutely.
That's the alternative approach to the cutting.
So I feel like, Brian, when you're asking your questions, you're asking what's that silver bullet? Like, how do we know it's successful? Well, it's going to be a series of metrics, right? I don't think debt to GDP is a good proxy for anything. I think deficit is actually a better, more real-time understanding measure of what we're doing. Japan's kind of an anomaly to really compare to, because one, they are a smaller economy compared to us. We're also different. We're the reserve currency, right? There's also an effort to make us not the reserve currency. So there's a lot of other moving parts there as well. But to me, there's gonna be a lot of different proxies for how is this working? Is it working well? It's not going to be a 1 trillion, a 2 trillion, a magic number. Like, we will have a number, I'm sure, at the end of this, but the question is, are our processes flowing better? Are we being more efficient? Are we getting a better competitive pricing for different things that the government are buying, right? Or is everything just cost plus, right? Which is insane. Like, you would never build your house as cost plus, but guess what? That's how the government works. And this is someone who was in the Navy, trust me, like, they spend money on things, and the way it works is you want to use your whole budget by the end of the year, because guess what? If not, you get screwed next year. That's so backwards, right? So I think there's a lot of different things, and part of it is growing the economy. Cutting a lot in government, making government more efficient, can help spur growth in the economy as well. But it's both sides of the coin. If I told you, hey, Brian, you got X amount of debt, go make more money, that's not the solution. The solution is, yeah, maybe go look for a job that can pay you more, maybe upskill yourself so you can have more ways to generate revenue and income for yourself, but it's also to take a look at your own budget and cut where you need to cut, right? And lean out. Like, that's, to me, the saying that they don't understand government, I think they probably understand government better than any of us here. Elon deals with government nonstop, whether it's through SpaceX, whether it's through NHTSA, whether it's through the Boring Company. The guy probably understands the government and where things are happening better than pretty much any other CEO, because he has to do it from so many different domains. So
I'm going to hard disagree on that, because what he gets is a very unique experience, which is he's on the defensive against them all the time. That doesn't mean he knows how politics works at the high level or even in Congress, or, you know, how budget reconciliation or committee bill
I mean, he got
surviving
Trump
committees
elected.
work.
Seems like he does pretty well.
That's
how
not
to do it.
politics. That's social media. I mean, yeah, he knows media, he knows business, and he knows when regulators are being jerks. That doesn't mean he knows politics.
I think they're one and the same now. I think
I
that's
know-
been proven.
All right.
I think one question that needs to be asked, just the general question, is how much power should you give to somebody who's not elected?
Or
Whoever
even
it is.
inside of government.
Whoever it is. Whoever it is.
Well, that's, I guess that defines what you mean by power. If you consider him and Vivek giving suggestions, I don't really consider that power. It's suggestions from the brightest minds out there.
Agree entirely.
It's up to the Congress whether or not they do it. They can't do anything. Just because he says delete doesn't mean it's deleted. That's his opinion. That's what he thinks. He's like, hey, this is clear waste. That should obviously be deleted. Now, the House and you know, just Congress in general, they're the ones that have to actually make the decisions. Even Trump can't just make the decision, right? Unilaterally. Sorry, I'm using words I can't spell. But it's going to have to go through Congress. It just has to. Like, there's no going around that. Now, that deadline is important, in my opinion, because here's the deadline. Congress either get this through. If not, you want to talk about politics and social media? Guess what? Here's a campaign to make sure you don't get reelected because you wouldn't do what needs to be done.
I agree with, by the way, if Congress signs off on everything, if it's purely advisory, we suggest this and Congress really does sign off, I don't think there's an issue. I mean, there's an issue, somebody's can complain, but in terms of the legal issue, if they go about doing it the correct way, I think they do it the correct way.
Yeah. And Richard, do you really think there's always going to be one or two, right? Always. But in general, I don't think anyone who gets a 2-year severance package is going to complain about anything.
Well, it's funny because I had that conversation with somebody earlier. If you were at Google getting your 2-year severance package, that's different than if you're like a first-year person at the Department of Housing making $35,000. So I know that everybody will get severance, but will they be satisfied with that and whatever? There'll be enough that won't be satisfied.
You make $35K and you get $70K up front.
Richard, at this point, you're kind of arguing at this point that you're not allowed to fire any government employee because they're going to sue you. That's just not. It's just
no.
It's going to happen, but you need to be able to fire people regardless.
No, I'm not. You can't do mass firings, and you can't do it. Well, whether you should or should not.
Promise you can.
Yeah, whether you should or should not. My point is not whether you can do any of this, because I think you could do all of it. My point is not that day one they can't do it. It's what's going to happen when it's challenged. That's not a question. This is not an argument about getting it done, because of course it'll get done. He's got a majority and he's got a control of all the branches of government. So of course it get done. It's a question about when it's challenged in court, what the outcome is going to be, and that's completely different.
But like, what's the challenge? Like, oh, we don't have that department anymore. We don't need it. I don't know. What do you want me to hire you back for? To do what? To something that doesn't exist?
That's not the challenge. The challenge is it's not constitutional to do the firing in the first place.
But if Congress does it.
If Congress, that's what I said. If Congress does it, we're okay. Well, it's only if they act independently, if they actually have authority. If they don't have authority, then this is just a waste of, we're having a conversation today.
Okay,
if they actually have authority, that's the question.
Based on the press release, this is not an official government entity, right? That's what they said here. Provides with the Doge department will provide advice and guidance from outside of government and will partner with the White House and Office and Management and Budget. It sounds like they may make some decisions to drive large-scale structural reform, create an entrepreneurial approach to government never seen before. That's the announcement.
Well, again, my view is like a month ago when they decided they were going to do this, they met with their lawyers, they decided the approach, and they probably know a lot more than they are letting on to in terms of also cuts and things they're going to do. And I think this is just a way of presenting it that's most likely in their mind to survive challenge, to advance. But I don't believe, just again, using titles or words changes the legality of anything.
Okay, that's fair.
I think we're all on the same page on this one, though. But the timeline is clearly they're trying to do it before the next election to put pressure and to get something done, right? Because this will be probably the seminal, or one of the seminal things that Trump gets done in his first 2 years. Yeah,
because historically speaking, the majority lose seats in the midterms. Yep. So this might be a way of retaining
Trump.
Yeah, I mean almost all of them do, and this might be a way of trying to retain Republican seats in that mid-year election because they could ride on this.
Yeah, the timing is I think that's enough time, and the timing being 4 months out from the election is 5 months out is about perfect. It'll be, I don't know. I think that's the right time frame.
Brian, what in your mind would make this successful, or consider this being done right?
So optimistically, Elon will pull together the right people who know how to dig into these things. He's very good at getting the smartest people in the room, and he'll lay something out. And unlike the tech council he was on for Trump 8 years ago, it'll actually be read. and they'll actually try and do something. My concern is that once it gets to Congress, every district is going to be impacted and no one's going to want to do it. And the agencies won't want to do it. They'll say, look, we're going to ask you to take over this other agency because we're going to combine the two agencies, but also we're not giving you all of their budget. We're giving you 60% of their budget. Oh, and also we're cutting your budget by 40%. We expect you to do the same job. I think that'll be crippling. I think, there are some things like the FAA, which is already underfunded to a degree that made sense, 20 years ago when rocket launches were once a month. But now that they're 4 or 5 times a week, they do not have good funding for that. They need to actually have a staff dedicated for that. So if it's only going to increase funding in ways that helps Tesla and SpaceX and Elon's other ventures while cutting things that don't, I think that would look suspicious. But if they're from the outside and Congress is the one doing all the actual cuts, I think Congress is going to have a very weak stomach for those cuts. I think I'm hoping, to answer your question, I'm hoping that we see some suggestions like the dumb spending leaderboard, where it is so abundantly clear that we need to trim a thing, that maybe they'll do a bunch of little tiny standalone bills that stand no chance of being voted down and just push all those through. I think that would be something that they could actually get done, and in a way that only upsets the very few people who are directly impacted by the loss of spending money that never should have been spent in the first place.
I, of course,
so-
think they should.
oh.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go.
I, of course, think they should. That part of the problem is just the term limit of Congress.
I know,
is too,
right?
Is too short. So they're always running for re-election, which means they can't do anything. I think that really is a burden that we face, and it cripples our government.
It's not only are they always running, but then there's also not real term limits in general, right? So it's like then you're there perpetuity, which is insane.
And you're running in perpetuity.
Exactly. But Brian, I think that if they have what he called the dumb whatever leaderboard, I think that transparency, as we get into that election in 2 years from now, that is that blend of internal politics and social media. That's what you're seeing there. It's that shining a light on the problem and amplifying it to actually get results done. It's the only way anything gets done is when you shine light on it, especially within government. And I think that is going to be a big way that they, kind of inject some technology, which is very basic technology exists, into the system to really help get people to do the right thing, because people tend to do the right thing when others are watching them. It's when people aren't watching them and aren't aware that you see people's real integrity.
I saw somebody comment that fact that there was transparency made it more like a pure agency, because the agencies are supposed to be accountable to the public. Most, the citizens, most agencies aren't. This would be like the superstar agency, because it would be directly accountable to the public. It would give you the information
and listening from them too.
Accept feedback, but it also then would be more easily characterized as a regulatory agency on the flip side.
All right, let's change the conversation a little bit to what's going to happen to Elon Musk, what's going to happen to Tesla. So some people think this is negative for Elon because he's going to be very busy. But we know that Elon, he said this, that he cares so much about the country that's what he's doing. It doesn't matter if he loses money. It doesn't matter if this impacts Tesla. He just thinks that there is no success for Tesla or SpaceX if this country goes goes bankrupt. But some people are realizing now that maybe actually this is going to be very beneficial to Tesla. Elon's and his reputation. Here's one example. Justin from Lord Pretty Flacco said this: one thing no one's talking about, every single country is going to treat Musk and company with the highest possible level of respect and consideration. This is an extremely underrated fact. I mean, he already has that, right? He's going around shaking dignitaries' hands left, right, and center. But we saw him in the last week. He's meeting with Ukraine. He's meeting with Milei. He's along with Trump. They're going around, and he's part of that. Does that not give him even more power, therefore more respect, but I feel like he's already gotten what he needed. It's not like he needed more. Any kind of, and is it a negative for Tesla or is it a positive for Tesla?
I think it's positive across the board. Elon already had the respect. What he has now is kind of a unspoken understanding of, you know, it's this can sound weird, but Elon now has the person who has control of the most powerful military in the world as his, you know, kind of buddy, right? And that, listen, I'm not saying that means anything, but when you're sitting there and you're having a back and forth negotiation, it's a lot different if I have, you know, Dwayne Johnson staying next to me and we're having negotiation than if I don't. I'm just speaking the reality, the truth that maybe people don't want to talk about, and that's what he's talking about there. It's like you're less likely to mess with someone or try to give someone a raw deal, or then when that guy's staying next to me. And it works the other way around too. You know, what else are you trying to get out of the States? Maybe Elon could put in a good word to or broker conversation. Like it works both ways too.
I would say that this is not a negative for Tesla and Elon's other companies, but I would agree that the level of respect that was already held for Elon in all these countries by all these companies, a lot of them really, really want the next Tesla factory, and they're all willing to fight over it to offer the best deals. And the companies that don't like him, who cares? I've got so many other offers. My dance card is full.
I love that.
Maybe it'll just be that it's more public. You know, I think he was meeting with everybody anyway behind closed doors. Now he's much more out in the forefront. I think it's just gonna be more public. I wonder, God forbid, at any point in time, does this give him the idea to go into politics?
No. He's already said he's not going to do that. This is his way to get into politics. Yeah, that's why he's not doing it. He doesn't need to.
He'd wrap his. Never mind. I'm not gonna say that. He would. I think he would die of boredom if he did.
Unless he thinks that he needed to be president in order to make more changes. But I think he's got what he needed now. He doesn't need to do this. He's going to make changes. Yeah, can't be president anyways. So this is it. Yeah, so this is Doge, right? Department of Government Efficiencies, 428 federal agencies. He thinks should be 99. So that's a lot of, I think one option that he could do, and Richard, I was going to explain this or talk about this, which is he could just give a framework of how things and process should happen, and then they execute it. Like the way he built his company, he gives it a framework, he gives it a mission, he properly aligns the incentives, he hires the right people, those people are bought into the mission and incentives, he gives them guidance, and then he's off doing another company, but meanwhile this company is executing based on his framework that he put into place. They succeed because he set them up properly. If he does this, he doesn't have to be the one to cut 200, 300 agencies. He just needs to be one to say, okay, if the agency passes these metrics, this is how we're going to measure it. We're going to properly align everybody now so that issue you guys brought up about budget renewal each year, that's kind of changed a bit. Then it will self-correct and self-heal over time. And maybe that's what he does. I don't know how it would happen, but this is him. This is Elon, one of the greatest minds in the world, thinking of things through first principles.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you said I think it just comes down to, again, ultimately, does he have authority or not? If it's just a framework, advisory, whatever, I agree. It's 100%. It's perfectly fine. It's going to be somebody on the other side who's going to claim he has authority. And it's going to be real factual determination whether he's calling the shots or not. If he's not calling the shots, then it's just a bogus argument to the contrary. So that's the way.
I agree. And, last I'll say on this is that I really do think that we've seen people nonstop over the years. We've all lived through it, right? As Tesla investors, people saying Elon doesn't know what he's doing, X, Y, Z. He didn't know what he was doing with Twitter when he went in there and fired everybody. He didn't know what he was doing at Tesla when he did all the layoffs every single year, when he got rid of the supercharging team. He didn't know what he was doing when he got rid of all of the sensors, on and on. And turns out, apparently he did know what he was doing all along. Apparently he wasn't a rocket scientist. Hey, somehow he figured that out. Apparently he doesn't know anything about LiDAR, and he's not an autonomy expert like all these other people. Apparently they know what they're doing. He doesn't know how to build cards. It's not Ford and GM. Apparently, he knows what he's doing. So I would say when it comes to government, I think that's probably gonna be a little easier than rockets, electric vehicles, and autonomy.
Yeah.
And I think he'll figure it out.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure of that. I think it's an irrational system and it may not be easier. I think it might be more difficult to unwind.
Okay.
I'm obviously with Richard on this one.
Yeah. All right. Well, great discussion. Glad that we had different opinions. Follow Brian on Future Oza. Stay on this channel right now. As soon as we shut this down, you'll get moved to his channel. He's going to do question and answers and address people's other questions they have. Nick Gibbs, Investing Against the Grain. And thank you so much for joining us this week, Richard. Appreciate you. See you, everybody.